I have another sort of abstract idea that I want to extrapolate on for this video, but it's also true that this is like a pretty common thing as well. I think most people say this is a joke, but I think there's some legitimate merit to the statement that, life is an illusion, and I do want to talk about why it may seem that way, but also another point. And that point being the fact that if we assume that life is an illusion orchestrated by our desire for a purpose or other biological factors, is it still worth living? Furthermore, if what we live in is an illusion, then what is reality as we perceive it? I think it's important to acknowledge that this is mostly taken from like an atheistic perspective, which is going to be because once you factor in the existence of an absolute being into the equation, then the question differs slightly in the capacity that life being an illusion has to revolve around the fact that a supreme being made it that way, which isn't anything too interesting to really contemplate about. I mean, I say it's not interesting, like it is, because if they intended it to be that way, then that kind of sucks, but it's uninteresting in the fact that reality is up to the divine being to decide and not ourselves. To get back to my point, we typically see the claim that life is an illusion being based on nihilistic and relativist perspectives, both of these being the fact that nothing has any value beyond the arbitrary ones we place on things or how they interact with our biology. Then relativism sort of expands this point to explain that the only reason we have a system of values is because we base it off of other imaginary values we've given to other objects where, in time, once you go down this long line, you come to the conclusion that because there's nothing truly objective about the value of conscious life, nothing really matters. You can probably see where this is going in the fact that because nothing truly matters, then the way people live their lives, loving, caring, hating, fearing, seems to be some sort of joke in a cosmic sense because there really is no need for them beyond the fact we simply say they're valuable. I think another aspect of this quote-unquote illusion can be looked at from a biological perspective as well, because feelings like hunger aren't something that is physically harming you in the same way a weapon would, but your body has reproduced a feeling of pain in order to drive you towards eating in the name of self-sustainability. You can really expand this sort of logic to the extreme, possibly even claiming that feelings like love derive from the need for security, which we desire because we fear death, which we fear because it's supposedly biologically hardwired into us to, eventually pass on our genes. But I don't exactly care to shove my full support behind that thesis simply based on the fact that consciousness seems to override simple biological desires in many cases, but you probably see the general point that I'm trying to make. Life seems to be an illusion in the fact that we live our lives placing value and emotions into things like money or sex, when factors like these are either something we've made up ourselves or simply share with any other species in the name of reproduction. Now that I've done an incredibly shallow dive into the claim that life is an illusion, I'd like to talk about if it's really any different than what we think of as reality. I think it's important to agree on the fact that reality isn't exactly something we always say to describe anything as being cosmically true, like the laws of physics, but rather something we deem as true on the basis of the information provided to us. This can be a tad distorted by the fact that completely contradictory things can be true to different people. Take, for example, a world where everyone sees the environment in terms of infrared wavelengths. We know that for visible light, there is a certain spectrum of wavelength or frequency, both compatible, that comprise what we see through our eyes. However, for this world of differently seeing people, the label of which they apply the term visible light as we do to the colors we see can be completely different while being simultaneously true. I only provide this example to say that while both seem to be rather unconflicting, us and this group of people fundamentally disagree on what the term visible light refers to. Looking back, I certainly could have used a better example, but this is all to say that what we call the truth is almost exclusive to how we experience the world, and the terms we use to describe the world can seem almost arbitrary when we look beyond ourselves. Now, circling back to the main subject, if we can grant that people can label what we call the truth differently, then I sort of come to the strange conclusion that what we label reality and others describe as an existence riddled with illusion really aren't any different. Albeit that the terms we describe anything with are typically metaphysically unimportant, it goes to say that although it seems contradictory to call an illusion reality, if we consider reality as what appears to be true through the perspective of ourselves while simultaneously concluding all of our perspectives are rooted in pointlessness, reality and illusion seem almost one and the same. Should you not buy the illusion theory, then your reality is what you perceive in the world by your senses. Should you buy into the illusion theory, then your reality is also effectively a truth of which you perceive through your senses as well. And what I mean by saying this is that if we have the ability to come to the conclusion that life is an illusion, then it's also equally true to say that it could be an illusion that we've come to the conclusion that life is an illusion. Regardless of whether or not what I just said was straight mumbo jumbo is relatively unimportant compared to the fact of whether or not it's worth living in said illusion, assuming this is the case. This really solely depends on what your main priority is in life. I mean, should your priority be in valuing the absolute truth, you might convince yourself that continuing to live in an illusion is pointless, as it's contrary to the ideal of truth, whatever truth means to you. The more giddy priority of choosing to live in happiness is another story. Even if we come to the conclusion that everything doesn't matter, this also simultaneously leads us to conclude that it is just as equally valuable to live life as if it is. For myself, I'm comfortable in subscribing to this sort of philosophy. If my life is truly meaningless, then I'm fine in being trapped in the illusion, for there is truly no difference between the two. Of course, it's up to you to decide what life is or means to you, but my own reality, or illusion if you prefer to call it, hopes that you and I can find happiness in a world with or without it. In any case, that's all I have to say.